Hi, I'm Lisa Pittman. I'm an attorney in Austin, Texas, and for the past 20 years I've been a commercial business litigator. But around 2014 I started to see this train coming with cannabis and the movement of cannabis as medicine sweeping the country. And when I read the Senate bill testimony of mothers with children with epilepsy for the CUP plan that we have in Texas, that's what lit the fire under me to get involved, and I have since focused my practice on the cannabis and hemp arena. And I worked with cannabis applicants in 2017, and I've been working to advocate to get the laws changed in Texas. I've also worked in multiple states, and in 2017, since we didn't get much movement on the compassionate use program, I moved to Colorado for 2 years so that I could really learn what it's like to practice law in a state where this is legal, and to learn what the issues are and how to solve them. And I really learned a lot of boots on the ground, in the trenches type lessons while I was out there. And while I thought I was moving out there to learn more about cannabis, really I became immersed in hemp, because that was right after a few years after the 2014 Farm Bill, and hemp products had really taken off. And so I became involved in a lot of disputes and issues, and involved with the hemp program in Colorado and the Colorado Department of Agriculture. And in our 2019 session, I started working with the legislature to try to get our hemp bill passed in Texas. And so that's what I'm here to talk to you about today, is the hemp law that we have in Texas and the status of the rules and what it's going to look like.
There we go. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what 1325 did, kind of starting with the 2018 Farm Bill and moving forward.
Okay, well, to back up a little bit, under the 2014 Farm Bill, states could grow hemp in two limited circumstances: if they had a research pilot program with a university, or if they created an industrial hemp program, such as Colorado, Kentucky, Montana, and Oregon were the four big states that took advantage of that. But in no case was hemp supposed to leave state lines. But of course it did. Once the word got out about the therapeutic benefits of CBD-based products, that propelled the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. And the legal significance of that was that it created a definition for hemp, which is 0.3% THC or less, because the cannabis plant contains hundreds of compounds, THC just being one of them. And it legalized it federally as an agricultural commodity that could cross state lines in interstate commerce and not be considered a Schedule I federally illegal substance anymore, as it was under the 2014 Farm Bill. So it was really pretty risky business with these products crossing state lines at the time. And in fact, it's still risky business, even though it is now federally legal, because the laws are still in a state of flux, and that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today too.
Okay, so then let's talk about what is the current status of where we're at with the regulatory process and what's going on there.
Okay, well, so to start with, House Bill 1325 is what legalized hemp in Texas in 2019. And we're in the midst of the regulatory rulemaking process that implements those rules. So first, a statute is passed, and a statute is like the backbone of the law. And then how that law operates in real practice is through the regulations and through the rules that are promulgated by the agencies that oversee the program. And in this case, the hemp program, the Texas Department of Agriculture regulates the program from licensing to harvest and disposal. And then the State Department of Health Services is going to regulate from the point of harvest to end consumable hemp product, including the processing of the hemp product, even though the TDA is actually going to be the one to license the processors. So far what we've got is the Texas Department of Agriculture has published a set of rules on January 10th in the Texas Register, and you can find them online. And the notice and comment period on those concluded on February 10th. And I'm a member of the Texas Industrial Hemp Advisory Council for the TDA. So we've been going over those comments, and some changes will be made, and then most of these rules are going to be adopted as final. And I would also point you to the Texas Department of Agriculture's website. They've done a pretty good job about putting information out. They have a frequently asked questions section. So what's going on right now is these rules are going to be adopted as final, and they go through the licensing process. So the licensing is expected to begin between March 1st and 15th. That's the goal. Because it's government, things could get postponed a little bit, but that's the goal, is to get farmers going planting. So what you'll have to do first is get a hemp license, and you'll apply online for that license. And that's your umbrella license for all of your property to grow hemp on that property. Then for each variety of hemp that you grow, that will be considered a lot, and you'll have to get a separate permit for each of those lots. And you can divide those lots up by variety or by section or however you want to do it, but it's $100 a pop for each lot permit that you get. And the Department of Agriculture internally has developed a flow chart demonstrating how this process is going to work. And I realize you can't really read this, but first you apply online. You're going to have to watch a training course. You're going to have a background check. So no one with a drug-related felony in the past 10 years can participate unless you're a farm worker. There's a provision in the rules called key participant. So it's really just key participants that rule applies to. So we can structure companies to have, some people as farm workers in your hemp company to avoid that. If you fail that for a background check is really about the only reason that I can see right now that they would reject your application, or some other clerical error. You can reapply. You'll be notified. If you pass, it goes up, and then you are triggered to register your lots and pay your permit fees. Once your permit is approved, the DPS is notified of this. And I'm just showing this chart so that you can see the different points in the process when the DPS is going to be notified as to your activities. So when your permit is applied, and then later on down the road, 15 days before you harvest, you've got to send samples off to a testing lab. The DPS will be notified of that. The DPS will be notified of the test results, whether you pass or fail those results. And then, if let's just say that you pass and you are successful under the stringent rules of keeping your crop under 0.3% THC, under a total THC testing methodology, then you will be issued a transport manifest by the Texas Department of Agriculture to send your crop off either for processing or whatever you're going to do with it, and the DPS will be notified of that as well. And the DPS can come on your land at any time and check it out. And also the Department of Agriculture can come on your land and do random sampling and inspecting. The only sampling that's required is that 15 days before harvest, and you're required to harvest within those 15 days. However, you cannot let that crop leave your property until you've gotten the test results back showing that you have a compliant crop, meaning that it's not a hot crop, which hot crop means over 0.3% THC.
Okay, awesome. Okay, that was a lot of information. So we've talked about the farming aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could touch a little bit on what is dishes and how do they come into play in this marketplace?
Okay, so DSHS is the State Department of Health Services, and they're going to regulate the retail sale and processing of consumable hemp products. So in their rules, they're going to have a list of metals and the acceptable limits for certain metals and pesticides and other things that can be in the product, the testing methodologies, and also what goes on the label, what goes on the shelf. A retailer is going to have a permit to sell CBD products. I think that permit's $100. If you are a retailer with multiple locations, you only need one permit for those multiple locations. And so they're going to be the ones that are going to be enforcing going into the stores and the product on the shelf to see if it's compliant or not. And DPS is also granted that authority, of course. So we'll see how that plays out.
So getting back to farming, I've been hearing a lot of questions from farmers about seeds. How will they be able to obtain seeds, and will they be certified for the climates that are in Texas?
That's a great question. So Texas has 5 different growing regions, and since we haven't grown hemp before, except for a long time ago in World War II, we don't know how these seeds that are coming from other states and other countries are going to perform in our 5 different growing regions. So right now, you have until May 1st to get seeds without having a hemp license, and I would encourage you to make sure that they're from a reputable seed provider or that they're certified by another state. Texas is still working on its process for how it's going to certify seed in Texas, but they are likely to approve a seed that is certified in another state already. But how that seed's going to perform in Texas, that's something that you're going to have to really do your research on and really be careful with to make sure that, for example, in the valley, it's hotter, and that could cause the THC levels to go higher. And there's just different factors in different parts of the state as to how those seeds might perform.
Makes sense. And talking about, seeds, not knowing if they're going to work in the zone necessarily, you can do your research, do the best you can in the meantime, but how does insurance work for crop insurance here in Texas?
Okay, so insurance is pretty difficult to obtain. I have a background in insurance, and so I've got some folks that I know will write some hemp insurance, but it's really, honestly, it's pretty hard to get. The 2018 Farm Bill did create a federally backed crop insurance program, but Texas was excluded from that. And the reason being is that you have to have grown hemp for at least a year, because insurance companies are risk averse and they want to take your premiums and know what their risk is before, going out on a limb to have to pay a bunch of claims. So there's no historical data in Texas for them to base that on. So that's why we're excluded from it. And a very important thing for everyone to understand is that although you can get various types of insurance, and you should, to protect your investment, and you can get crop insurance, none of that insurance is going to cover a hot crop, which is probably at your highest risk.
And can you define what is a hot crop?
So a hot crop is anything that's going to test above 0.3% THC.
And there's been questions about, will hot crop be remediated or destroyed? Can you tell us where they're at in the process right now?
Yes, so it is possible to have THC remediated, removed out of biomass by a processor. It's also possible to recycle it and ground it up into material for soil or for animal feed. It's called remediation. But Texas is currently not allowing that because we're under the constraints of the USDA rules that came out to implement the 2018 Farm Bill, and they require that a hot crop be destroyed in accordance with DEA guidelines by a DEA licensed reverse distributor. And so what they do is they have certain procedures that they follow to render a controlled substance unusable. And so we've been advocating to try to see if we can have a little wiggle room in this so that it's not a total loss for a farmer. But right now, as it stands, a farmer would have to not only destroy his crop and thus lose it, but also pay for the destruction of the crop. So we'll see how it goes. It's well known at the TDA that this first year is going to be experimental in nature, that we have these issues to contend with, and they're saying there's not going to be heavy enforcement, with that in mind. But keep in mind that, it is going to be difficult to keep your plant under 0.3%. There's been a lot of statistics from a lot of universities that have been studying this and trying to keep the plant under 0.3%. So my advice would be to start small in this first year while we're under these really rigorous rules.
That's really good advice. Are they offering any type of guidance or guidelines as to if you're growing your hemp for the purpose of a human consumable versus an industrial use? Will there be different guidelines on how those plants are to be grown?
So far not. So far it's just hemp license, lot permit. Even if you're growing in order to transplant, cut a little piece off to sell to somebody else, that's considered a harvest. And you've got to start over again to go again with it. So they're just treating it all the same right now.
Okay.
I will say, though, that if you're uncertain about, how this is going to play out for you, that growing industrial varieties are naturally already lower in THC, and you'll have less to worry about than if you're going for those high CBD-rich varieties, which are more lucrative, but they also come with higher THC levels that you have to manage.
And talking about the human consumable aspect of it and dishes being in charge of it, some of the rules that they've put out have restricted the retail sales of smokable and vapable hemp products. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that with us, please?
Yes, so actually in the text of House Bill 1325, there is a statutory intent expressed through various provisions to prevent the manufacture of hemp for the purpose of smoking. And some other states in the Carolinas have come out with rules, with court decisions, just deciding that smokable hemp is banned based on piecing together legislation. Well, to avoid that, DISH's just came out with a proposed rule that just has an outright ban on the retail sale of smokable hemp, period. So that's also kind of a problem in that who knows what they're going to do about loose flour, for example, because you could put that in a pipe or you could use it to make butter or your own medicine. So there right now the intent is to ban it. The official proposed rules are not out yet, so whenever those are published, I encourage everybody to comment on that very vigorously. Because it's the Indiana federal court has come out and said that this is unconstitutional, that the 2018 Farm Bill just legalized hemp as a federally legal agricultural commodity. It did not create separate forms of hemp, such as a form for smoking or a form to go in a tincture. It just legalized hemp. And so it's not fair to treat somebody differently in one state versus a different state for the exact same thing. So I think that the state is going to try to go for banning it. It's going to create an enforcement nightmare. It's going to create a lot of litigation. We'll see how long it lasts, but that's where they're headed.
Okay. And so talking about next steps, mm-hmm. We've got some rules from TDA that will mm-hmm. probably be finalized soon, so they'll mm-hmm. be able to start applying. Mm-hmm. But there's opportunities for regulatory advocacy, it sounds like, specifically with the consumable hemp. What other things are coming up over the next few months?
Well, the Texas Department of Agriculture is going to put out rules for processors. They haven't gotten to that part yet, so pay attention to that. Comment on that if you're involved in that aspect at all. And by the way, you can ship your product out to be processed in another state. It doesn't have to be processed in Texas. And then when DISH's proposes its rules for consumable hemp products, definitely make your voice heard. If there's a hearing, go to that hearing, submit your comments, and you can do that on your own through email.
Yes, and we'll make sure to keep everybody updated on that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And today we're going to be talking with a bunch of veterans. That's what we're recording mm-hmm. this for. And so I was wondering, is there any special veteran incentives or programs built into the hemp program, or how is that going to work?
Yeah, no, there's no real preference for veterans or minorities or anything of that sort, or Texas residents even, in the Texas hemp statute or in the rules. And that's just kind of the way Texas is. It's just open, free market system. But to the extent that there are programs for veterans that give assistance or tax breaks for lending and so forth, you can structure your company to be veteran-owned and take advantages of those programs.
All right, great. So mm-hmm. just optimize what's already available to yourself if you're moving into this direction.
Absolutely, yes.
Wonderful. Well, is there anything that we might have missed that you'd like to add on to what we've talked about today?
Really, I just want everyone to be really careful and be careful about who you work with, and make sure that if you're using a consultant or you're buying seeds, or that you have a reputable supplier, those genetics, or that you're working with someone who, not somebody that you just met at some random conference. You've got to do your due diligence. There are so many snaky people out there. There's still a criminal element to this. I saw it for my own eyes in Colorado. It's still going on. There's a lot of folks descending upon Texas to try to make a buck off of Texans. I represent a lot of farmers, and I see some incredibly predatory contracts presented to me from some out-of-state people purporting to come in and consult and, take too much of the yield from the product and so forth. And there's just, you really got to watch your back. And I would advise using a lawyer and just being very careful about who you work with, and absolutely doing your due diligence on what sources of that person that you're doing business with, what's their history, and ask for references. Ask for other people that they've sold a seed to. Do they have good experience or not? There's a lot of cases of folks selling bad seed or male seed or something that didn't turn out to be what was promised. There's a ton of that, and they're kind of fly by night and they disappear. I've had some companies that were going to sell services or products to my clients, and I can't even find their company registered on the Secretary of State website in their state. So you just got to really be careful in this business right now.
That's really good advice. And with your permission, I would love to make sure we get your email and your website available to everyone who's attending so that they can reach out to you.
Yes, absolutely. I would love to help anybody who needs help with this. Yes. That's why I spent the time in Colorado, to bring that experience back to Texas and to help us with, learning what I saw out there.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to record this, and not being able to be with us today. It really meant a lot that we can still have your expertise available to all of the attendees. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. Always.